everyone, my name's Julia Payton-Jones. I'm thrilled that you're joining me and Hans Ulrich today for a short conversation of about 30 minutes. These are very strange and disturbing times. Here I am at home in West London talking to you online, which in itself is very discombobulating because, as anybody who knows me well is fully aware, I'm not very technically agile and I drink bucket loads of builder's tea, so I hope all of you are drinking your version of builder's tea, coffee or whatever. Today is an experiment, and if all goes well, or at least reasonably well, then I will be having tea with Elvira Barrington at the same time next week, which will be advertised or communicated on in the Gallery Today Serpentine's weekly newsletter, which is sent to our subscribers. If you want to join, then you can do so via a link in our Instagram bio or via our website. In many ways, Hans Ulrich needs no introduction. He's curated 350 shows, he's written literally hundreds of books, he's one of the world's most influential people in the art world, and he's on the cusp of having 300,000 Instagram followers, which is an extraordinary number. We were introduced by the artist Richard Wentworth in 1994. Richard wrote this wonderful letter to me, or postcard, which said, I really think you should meet this young Swiss curator. And I invited Hans Ulrich, as a result of this introduction, to curate a show in 1995 called Take Me, I'm Yours. It was a tremendous success, and obviously we stayed in touch since that pioneering work together to 2006, when I invited him to be co-director of the exhibitions and projects at the Serpentine and director of international projects. I was director and co-director of exhibition and programs, the most lengthy titles known to mankind, but actually they were incredibly descriptive of what we did. Our collaboration, our working relationship was, I think, in many ways unique because we had a level of honesty in how we communicated. I would say things to Hans Ulrich that I don't think I would have said to anybody else, and maybe he said the same things to me. There were moments when we agreed 1,000%, and moments when we had really tough conversations when we didn't see eye to eye. The thing that united us, I think, amongst many other, was our love of art, obviously, but also of architecture and design. And there was a marvellous evening when, after a bit of time, Hans Ulrich said, look, I'm going to be in London, I'm going to be talking at the Courtauld, and I said I'd like to go and see him. And we had one of those sort of marathons where we were trying to find a place to eat, and a number of students wanted to come with us because they were big fans of Hans Ulrich's work. And we were trailing around from restaurant to restaurant. We were too many people for anybody to want to take us. So gradually throughout the evening, people fell off away from the group. And I took a taxi and dropped Hugo back at his hotel. And we were talking, about architecture and all sorts of things. So, oh my God, this is so great. We must continue. And so for a year, we had a daily discussion about what was concerning us, what was interesting us, what we wanted to talk about. And at the heart of it all was the role of the museum at that point in time, the point in time being 2005. We spoke for a year, and it was really thrilling and exciting, as indeed was my time of working with him. There is something inspiring about having a colleague who tests you really hard. And as a result, you have to be, I think the expression is, a better version of yourself. I learnt hugely from the experience. And as I've said, many of our ideas were in synergy, and some, I thought about new ways of looking in all sorts of different ways. And I'm very thrilled that the Serpentine, in its 50th year, is going on to a new chapter with Bettina Korrick, who is the new director, and I really wish her well. She arrived in London the week before lockdown, so she had to really come to terms with reorientating herself in the city, and also the task that lies ahead. 50 is really a grown-up now. The Serpentine can no longer claim to be, you know, an alternative space. You know, it's a really established organisation, and one that I was very, very proud to have run for 25 years. It was an extraordinarily exciting time, a time when in 1991 Frieze had just, the magazine and the exhibition had just started, or was within recent history, and the art world in the UK was really changing out of all recognition. It was absolutely thrilling. No public organisation had any money, and the Serpentine certainly didn't. And so one of the things that perhaps I'm best known for, which is fundraising, I embraced with enthusiasm, having two options. One, to embrace the public sector and work with the Arts Council to try and generate a larger grant for us, or to I've got to accept a request, and I'm going to do it, and like a magician, Hans-Ulrich should pop up on the screen, I hope. But fundraising is very much part of everybody's life now, and it's really I'm just waiting, Hans-Ulrich, and I'm pressing buttons nervously.
Hi,
here we are, as if by magic, thank God. People
good morning.
Rabbiting on. How are you?
Good, how are you? Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you. And so how is everything in West London?
Yeah, it's very nice to see you, and we are having tea.
I know. Well, I've actually got tea. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, are you using your kitchen, or is it an exhibition?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you would ask about the kitchen, because I was just this morning finding actually the publication of the kitchen show, because I started to curate in my first exhibition in the kitchen in '91. So that's the little publication. And the idea was to actually do a very intimate show in the kitchen. It was an idea with Peter Fischli and David Weiss. And they basically installed a kitchen altar, because I had only books in my kitchen. So they took the books out and brought in food, oversized quantities of food, reserves, so as to say, which could then be used for many, many months. And then, of course, there was also Frédéric Poulidroibre, Richard Wentworth, whom you mentioned, who introduced us, was part of it. And Frédéric Poulidroibre sent drawings actually every week from Côte d'Ivoire. This is a sculpture in favor of the kitchen.
Fantastic.
And I think you showed also Frédéric Poulidroibre.
No, we did.
In the early show, no?
Yes, in the early 90s, before the renovation, it was in a show called Out of Africa.
And Hans-Peter Feldman, actually, he did this little book about kitchen elements, but he did not want to exhibit in the kitchen, because he said he wanted the fridge. His venue was the fridge. So we had a fridge exhibition by Hans-Peter Feldman, and actually the show lasted for 3 months and had 29 visitors.
29?
Yeah.
But you know what? One of the things is, the exam question is, what is going to change post-virus? And, you know, we all have our fantasies about, you know, how we'll be working, what we'll be doing. But do you think, can you conceive that we'll ever go back to smaller exhibitions, more intimate exhibitions, more in a way, more private exhibitions? Because I find that I'm having conversations with people I don't know so well, which are extraordinarily honest, and it's great. It's really, really great. So is there a version of the kitchen Mark II?
Yeah, I think that in a way, this idea of doing intimate shows has never really gone away. But before answering, I just wanted to answer your first question and show you my favorite recipe of the kitchen. That is actually Ion. I wanted to recommend everybody this Ion product from Emma Kunz. It comes from this amazing grotto in Switzerland. And we showed her drawings at the Serpentine. That's one of her drawings. And of course, this can be used in many different ways. It can be dissolved in water and one can drink it. It can be also used for the bath. It's a medicine. It can also be given to plants. So this just as a recommendation, the application of ion in many different ways. But I think the idea of intimate exhibitions has always been there. I mean, after the kitchen, I did a hotel exhibition in a hotel room in Paris, and there was always also an ongoing exploration of house museums, in order to show at the Sartre-Chanson's house, at the Barragan house, at the Locker house. And of course, at the moment, it would be difficult to have an exhibition even visited by 29 people because we're self-isolating. So that is why we reactivated Do It, because Do It is a show based on instructions and how-to manuals, which we started with Boltanski and Lavie in '93. And since then it has kind of grown. It's like an ongoing conversation. And everybody can just do it, can just realize these instructions. And it includes instructions not only for the kitchen, many different things in the apartment. One can make a sculpture with the broom, instructed
but
by
also
France.
Owen Worm's fantastic Instagram of him getting into this huge jumper. And, you know, actually, if you're, wherever you are, and no matter how small your space, those kind of things which are so enlivening and invigorating and kind of inspiring, that makes you think actually life's okay, you know, there is a future, as well as there is a past.
Yeah, Erwin gives us an instruction to put on a pullover, but don't stick arms or head through the normal openings. Squat down and pull the end of the pullover down over your knees and feet. So you see it here.
But on your Instagram, there's also a fantastic short video of Erwin getting into one of these pullovers. Now, I'm not so adept as you, so I probably won't be able to find it. But if I do, I'll be able to go into it and show people. Let me see if I can. Maybe not. But it is exciting.
1 second, I think I found it. 1 second.
Have you? Oh, good. Yes, exactly.
Mit beiden Beinen in die Ärmel eines Pullovers schlüpfen. Vorbeugen, Kopf nach unten, Beine breit. Das Ende des Pullis über den Kopf nach oben ziehen. 1 Minute lang stehen bleiben.
Fantastic. Fantastic. It's really great. But so what projects are you working on?
There are some other instructions I wanted to read. There is also Lucy Lippard. Lucy Lippard was, of course, very inspiring for Do It because of her early 60s, 70s postcard exhibitions with instructions. Lucy says, do something that is visually striking, socially radical, conceptually and contextually sensitive, sustainable in the public domain, and hurts no living thing, something that we changed the world. Good luck. And I think that's a quite beautiful way to think about art now. And then, of course, there are lots of other instructions. Courchon gives us instructions how to do a drawing. Louis Bourgeois gives us drawings, and then Louis Bourgeois gives us instruction how to smile at a stranger. Simon Forti gives us instruction how to make a face mask with underwear, and Carsten Heller invites us to games, and Felix Gonzalez Torres invites us to get 180 pounds of a local wrapped candy and drop it in a corner.
And yes, and also, I mean, one of your recent posts, which I was very touching, was the death of Marcus Rex. And what is so extraordinary is that when, you know, when wonderful thing happens, but also when sad things happen, you have an archive that you can draw on of your very personal experiences and relationships with the artists. You know, Marcus did an extraordinary show at the Serpentine in the early 90s, and earlier Swiss Cross Currents in Swiss Art, which was curated by Richard Calvo-Caresi in the late 80s. But, you know, he was such an important figure and somebody that you knew very well, I think.
Yeah, it's actually very moving, and we have to remember Marcus Reitz here, who passed away this week. I'm so happy you mentioned him, because he actually sent me a letter maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago where he spoke so fondly about the exhibition you did, Julia. Was it a retrospective you did of his? Or what
Yes,
was it?
It was a kind of survey, and really at the time we did it, he was very little known, relatively. But then household names in the early 90s, they didn't have that same kind of currency that they do, that artists and indeed other people do now. And it was a very important exhibition because it was an exhibition that the public could relate to and engage with and wonder at. And that sense of wonder, I think, is extraordinary. And he epitomized that, both then, but also in an ongoing way. And he touched something that was both very profound, but also very accessible. And I think that's one of the things that is so interesting for a public institution to do, is to both be profound and accessible. It's not an easy challenge, but important. And actually, I wanted to move on to, because I've been told that half an hour is our limit, that if we go beyond half an hour, people might get bored. I don't think so, but anyway, I've got an alarm on my phone which will ring when we have to stop. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is the really beautiful book that you've done of the letters that Maria Lasnik wrote to you. I come from an age of letter writing, and in fact I have a writing paper that is, you know, absolutely so old-fashioned as a concept. And in reading Maria's letters to you, which are very, very, I mean, she was so fond of you, and it was wonderful to work with her when we did that show at the Serpentine. But the thing that struck me was that they're like, letters are like objects. The way that she writes, the way that she lays out the page, there are no mistakes on the page. There's no rethinking. And when people talk about the art of letter writing, it really is an art. And of course, your great Instagram project, the Protest Against Forgetting and the Protest Against the Forgetting of Handwriting, seems to me very much linked to the idea of letter writing.
Yeah, it's indeed something which has to do with the protest against forgetting and the protest against the disappearance of handwriting and doodling, which I usually always post on Instagram, these handwritten notes after studio visits and meeting artists or architects. And of course, that had now to pass, which is why over the last 4 weeks, the Instagram became the Do It archive in a way. But
and the duck interview series.
Yeah, there were also the animal interviews. It's actually interesting, because the other day I had an email from Quinn Harrison, and he was asking, you know, he was quoting Freud in terms of the interpretation of the dreams, and he was saying, what asks the proverb, do geese dream of? And it replies of maize. And that, of course, is interesting in relation to the theory that dreams somehow are wish fulfillment. So I think the idea of animal interviews are daily conversations where I ask animals in the park about their unrealized projects. But the letters, I mean, you're right, letter writing, even more so than handwriting, is disappearing, because with letter writing, it's also the idea of actually of time, when one looks at these letters of Maria Lasnik, she would send me these very, very long letters over 2 or 3 pages. She would also draw. And then she would stop, and maybe a week later with another pencil or another pen, she would continue. And that's also why we published it as a book with the Lasnik Foundation, because they're really very long documents, long letters where she reflects on photography, on art, on the role of art. Of course, also on her famous doubts, because she had these doubts always. She was very tortured by doubts. And remember when we did the show at the Serpentine, a week before the opening, she wanted to cancel it because she said, my paintings are not good enough. And then that's in the book. These doubts are in the book. And I think it's interesting in this current moment to think about many things. I mean, it's of course, to finish with Do It, is to think about not only what we can do, but also what we can do for someone else, what we can do for other people seems to be so important in the current moment. And then of course, to think also about rituals, about things which disappear. And I think the idea that we could somehow bring letter writing back could be nice. And it's of course very easy, because we can handwrite these long letters and then email them to each other.
But letter writing is really difficult. Because firstly, she had no crossings out, which in itself is nothing short of miraculous. Because the convention is that if you write, when you write, you don't repeat words. So your thinking has to be so tuned, so orchestrated, so complete, that it can come from the brain into the hand seamlessly. And also, I find that my handwriting now is very kind of undisciplined. It's sort of all over there. It's very splodgy because it's so much easier to do it on an iPad and to type directly. So it's very, very, I think it's very, very challenging in preparation for this discussion and thinking about letter writing.
And somebody wanted to know about whom we're talking. So we're talking about the letters of Maria Lasnik, the artist Maria Lasnik, her handwritten and doodled letters. And in these letters, she basically has a very moving last letter where, and she wrote that letter a few weeks before she passed away. It's the last letter, and it wasn't sent anymore. It was found when she passed away on her desk, unfinished. It interrupted in the middle, but it has this amazing sentence in it that where she said, "We cannot live without art." And I think that's an incredibly moving sentence also for now. We always need art.
But she was, I mean, Maria Lasnik was somebody who was very, very private. I remember so well going to her studio, and she would have a sort of internal clock which allowed us to only see a certain number of paintings or a certain number of drawings. And once that alarm clock, so to speak, had gone off, she would shut it and say, "No, you cannot see any more." So it was impossible to go to her studio and to see all of her work. All you could see was the amount that she was prepared to show you. And from that, of course, we made the show together with your knowledge of her work. And it was, you know, it was really a revelation. And do you remember the image? There was the image or the painting that we had when you walked in the Serpentine was of Maria naked, a woman in her 80s, and holding a gun. And the Guardian at that time had an editorial meeting about whether they could use that image in the newspaper because it was, as far as they saw it, so profoundly shocking. And it was amazing that she was able to be so radical at her age in a way that I think she didn't feel the response that people had to her work, and how extraordinary they found it.
And of course, your Instagram, Julia, has a lot to do with doodling and handwriting, because you have a ritual of daily posts. Can you tell us about that? It's a form of diary, one can say, no?
Yes, I gave myself a kind of challenge, I suppose you could say, that I would do a drawing every day about, it's called a daily report. It's very modest. It's what happens in my life, and which is largely uneventful. And I post them every day. And it's interesting to see, in the beginning, they were like little stick people. And then over the period of 4 months since I've been doing it, they began on the 1st of January, they've developed into a different kind of drawing. And I was always very fascinated because people said to me, "Oh, well, of course, you must be drawing your daughter as she grows up." And I never did. However, this daily diary has allowed me, daily visual diary, has allowed me to do that. And so I now draw her she's in my drawings very regularly. But it's also a way to experiment and to test myself and to see what, if any, progress I can make. And I'll be very interested to see how it evolves after 12 months.
And it's interesting, Maria, it might be a book, actually. And we should also might produce a book. But when Maria said in this last letter, you know, that we cannot live without art, it made me also think about, of course, the current moment and the necessity of art in very difficult times. And you were asking me earlier, because I didn't answer your earlier question, what I'm working on at the moment. And so actually, it's different things. Of course, Bettina Korek and I and our teams had to close, the exhibitions. And so we are working online now. We felt that it's important not only to do live streaming, there's so much live streaming going on right now, but also to do things which actually lead to actions and why we're doing these campaigns of Back to Earth with our Back to Earth team. We have 50 artists. It's something we started already earlier this year, 50 artists to do ecological campaigns. We have next week campaigns launched by Olafur Eliasson, and we are working also with Judy Chicago, Jane Fonda, Swoon, and there will be further campaigns also by Turquoise Dyson. And so throughout the weeks, there are these artists' campaigns. There is, of course, also podcasts and exhibitions like the ones of Saufe and Forma Fantasma, which are closed now, continue online through activities. But we also started to do a research, and that has very much to do with Maria's question, no, but that we cannot live without art. And the research I started to do has a lot to do with the 1930s, because I remembered actually that somebody of Maria Lasnik's generation was Helen Levitt, the wonderful photographer. And I once went to see her as part of the protest against forgetting interviews, and was in her house, and it was a very strange situation because it was a very intimate kind of kitchen living room situation, and there was a table, and she sat on one side and I sat on the other side, and in the middle there was a low-hanging lamp which was quite warming, and that's why her cat would sit under the lamp. So it was a kind of it was actually the beginning of my animal interviews, because I would also interview the cat. It was interviewing Helen Levitt about her photographic pioneering work, and then the cat. And it was very strange because at the end of the interview, at the end of the conversation, she basically said that should there one day be a very big crisis in the world, that we should not forget the Roosevelt plan and what had actually been done during the government art programs, really, which had happened in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And that's really what I remembered suddenly a month ago. And I started to read a lot about this. And it's very fascinating because, of course, it all began in Mexico. It began in Mexico in 1926, when the muralists, Rivera and Orozco, would actually, and many other muralists, hundreds of muralists, would be employed by the government to do public murals. And so that somehow went then into America. And actually in the Great Depression began in 29. There was mass unemployment, and it became very difficult for artists to make a living. There were many different attempts. I mean, on the one hand, artists tried to be paid by actually rent, that they would rent works to museums, but it didn't produce the necessary economy. Markets were organized, but it became clear that only a large-scale governmental initiative could bring solutions. And of course, at that very moment we are living through, it's a very precarious moment for so many artists, for so many people, in all disciplines, in all worlds. And I think we, for this reason, need to revisit that scheme and think about what could be such a scheme for our time. What's the legacy of the Roosevelt New Deal, and how could we think about a New Deal? And then, of course, initially they mainly focused on public art, like in Mexico, but then they also focused on practical art. I mean, thousands of artists were commissioned to do posters, to do photography. That's, of course, why Helen Levitt knew about it, because her friend Walker Evans was commissioned with Dorothea Lange and others to work as a photographer. Then, of course, there were educational services. And then there were also Cahill, who was one of the directors of this program, invented these community art centers. And they helped, and that's something which is really fascinating, because it helped break down this strange notion that art could only be appreciated by a limited number of people. So that actually growing numbers of people began to see the value of art during that time. So it sort of started to build all kinds of bridges, and suddenly art entered society. It's also what John Latham and Barbara Stevini wanted to do with the artist placement group. And I mean, so many artists got their beginning, got their support, could never have actually worked as an artist in the 30s without that support system. Jacob Lawrence, the legendary Jacob Lawrence, was in his early 20s when he got the support. Philip Guston, the early murals, but also Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock. So I think it's really interesting to somehow learn from the New Deal and start to think what could be for our time such a New Deal. And of course, it's interesting to link that also to ecology, because Rifkin has written this very interesting book, The New Green Deal.
But before that, because I'm also conscious of the time and my alarm going in a few minutes, let's talk briefly about what art could be post-virus, how technology is going to impact it, because of course technology and art, that they're now happy bedfellows, so to speak, but we all use technology even more than we did before. It has an ever more present role in our lives. But what is your sense about how art will change post-virus, when we're all allowed back into the world?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Of course, I think art, it's a very huge question, no? And I mean, art will, it's a new era of social imagination which we need, and art, I think, will play a very big role in that new era of social imagination. So that's one thing. But you asked specifically about technology. I think it's interesting in terms of that somehow. Oh, that's the alarm.
Yes. Okay, but let's go on for a few more minutes.
Okay, yeah, I promise you that it won't be a. I promise you that it won't be a marathon.
It's a sprint. It's a sprint. It's not a marathon.
It's not a marathon. Yeah. So I got distracted by the alarm. What I was saying, yes, actually, the idea of technology, right? You wanted to know about technology. So I think it's interesting that with technology, I think there is a great potential for AR, for augmented reality, because I think in a way, even if it is not possible to have bigger gatherings, and it might very well be that the social distancing might go on for a longer time, as we could read yesterday. It might go on for a longer time, and that of course means that bigger gatherings will not be possible. I think this idea of experiencing public art, which is again why it's interesting to think about the Roosevelt years, the idea of public art, where we can experience art also from far away, where we can experience art in public space, is interesting. And of course, in relation to technology, that brings us to AR. Whilst it's very difficult with VR, because of course VR needs the goggles and shared goggles and all of that. I think with AR, it will be really possible to experience art on buildings. It will be experience art whilst walking through a park or whilst walking through a city. So I think there is a great potential for AR. I mean, Kushonga did this piece with Daniel Birnbaum with a cube of an ice cube,
which was in Frieze, in the Frieze Sculpture Park.
Exactly, it was at the Frieze Sculpture Garden, and you can actually look through it. It's a transparent ice cube. It can be micro and macro. It can go far away and be tiny, and then suddenly it's in front of your eyes. You can carry it, and it can be on buildings. And I think works like this, in terms of AR, would have a great potential. And somebody just made a comment that we can't be 18 hours a day in front of a screen, and indeed we can. So I think it is important also to think about how we can go beyond the screen during that time.
But I think, I mean, one of the things that I'm very fascinated about this period is a level of authenticity. I mean, I feel comfortable saying to people that I really don't know well. I mean, this is particularly from the art world, not in my kind of more in the wider world, my social world. If I say to somebody, "How are you?" I want to know the answer. I don't want some blah blah about, "Oh, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" And if somebody says to me, if somebody asks me, "How am I?" I tell them. I say, "You know what? I had a really bad day yesterday. I felt so depressed. I don't know why. Today's better." And from those more honest exchanges come a connection that I find totally inspiring and totally invigorating and humbling, because in this moment where the virus is kind of decimating everything and we're all living in a way a period of great fear, either for our family or our friends or maybe ourselves, we also have these ways of reaching out over and above the technical which is neutral. And I mean, it gets back a little bit to your idea about the letter writing and the handwriting, which is, of course, such a personal way of communicating with people. But that honesty, which has enabled us to strip away all this sort of stuff, I find immensely life-enhancing. And I think and hope, if anything, that when we come out of this, that will really remain. Having said that, I think we'll have to all work very hard to make sure it does. A note to self more than anything else.
But these are wonderful words, and I think it's very important, this idea of also coming to essentials, to what really matters, to what is urgent, and also at the same time to never lose optimism. It's interesting, our friend Ethel Adnan,
yes,
the wonderful poet and artist and polymath, architect also, she's an architect. She sent me an email a few days ago, and it was very moving because she talked about trees, and this idea that trees can be our best friends, because she of course wrote this very beautiful book about the Mount Tamalpais, where she says that the mountain can be our best friend. And actually the email from the other day was about trees being the best friend. And I'm going to read you here the email because it's very moving. She said, "The trees came back to life. They stopped crying, like we will all do. Times are hard, but in the 60s we were singing, 'We shall overcome.' and we did. Good things repeat themselves, like spring does. Let's send hugs, Etel. I thought it was a very moving message.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think with that, I'm going to send a big virtual hug to you and to Koo to say how wonderful it was to talk to you today, to thank you so very much, and to say I look forward to our friendship over decades to come, and to wish the Serpentine every good fortune for the next 50 years.
Thank you so much, Julian. Big hug to you and to Pia Lots of love.
Thank you. Big
Lots of
kiss.
love.
Bye.
Bye-bye.